All right, so we have one other type of loop type that we can use to actually iterate the contents of a file, and that is the for loop. Now, I mentioned the while loop is a little bit harder. It requires a little bit more effort on behalf of the programmer. The for loop is even easier. Okay, so Python allows the programmer to write a for loop that automatically reads the lines, detects the end of the file, and shuts it down. Okay, so the format is for line in file object, do the thing, right? And the loop iterates once over each line of the file and then is done. Okay, so let's jump back over to our PyCharm here, and I'll show you how simple this is. Now, with a while loop, I have to read in the first line, then I have to say while line is not empty, then I can print the line, then I have to update the line, and then I can print the end of the file. Okay. With a for loop, we can cut these 4 lines down to a much more manageable set of lines. So I just go for, I use a for loop, for line in my file is called F. I can go ahead and print line. Okay, so I've turned 4 lines now into 2. Let's make sure this runs and see what happens. There we go. All right, so I have 12, 15, 56. I've printed everything out. Now, if I want to get rid of the new line, I can do line.rstrip because I know this F is going to return a string. F, line is going to be a string, and I know that line is a string, so it has a method called rstrip, so I can get rid of that. So let's run that again. And now we have all of that data, just exactly like the while loop, but way, way, way faster. Okay, so I would encourage you to always use a for loop when you're iterating through files. Very simple, just open it up in read mode, for line in F, print the line, and then you can also do, different searches, and we can do different split functions, and we can mess around with things. And I'm going to talk about records here very, very shortly. This allows us to actually do record analysis. We can search a record, we can find information, we can run queries on the data that we're actually pulling in at this point inside of this for loop, because we can analyze every single record for data in, say, a CSV or a database file. Okay, so I would encourage you, mess around with the while loop, get good at it. It's important to understand it, but then I think in general practice, you'll probably just end up using a for loop to iterate back through that file. Okay, so there you go. Very, very simple, very, very cut and dry. All right, so I mentioned processing records. Now, this is a sort of an introduction to data analytics class. You're also going to get quite a bit of cybersecurity just because I'm a cybersecurity expert and I have a lot of passion for cybersecurity. But this, the functionality of this is for data and data analysis, right? Python is the #1 language used for data analytics, and we're going to try to express to you the power that you have to be able to manage data as you want to read it in, as you want to write it out, as you want to process it, as you want to do any analytics that you want to do. Now, in data, a data set, some data set fundamentals. Data sets generally are comprised of things called records, okay, and that's just one line of data, okay, so it's a set of data that describes one item. So if we have, say, a database, and the database has an employer table, okay, that employer table might have employee ID, it may have pay rate, it may have employee first name, employee last name, it may have employee start date, employee quit date, employee status, okay? So that all of that data put together is called a record. And the way that we would store that record is we would just give the ID, and then we would separate it with a comma, and then we would put the name and blah, 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 blah. I don't remember what order I put it in. But we would just sort of put that stuff in a string with commas in between it, and that would be the record. Okay, so in an employee database, each record represents one employee. Now, you could have a log or something as well. So maybe it's a login log, okay? In that case, each record represents a single login, okay? If you're measuring some sort of an instrument out in the field, it's going to be some sort of a reading from that instrument. It's generally going to be delineated by time, okay? So a record is a set of data that describes one single item. Now, in that record, you're going to have fields, okay? And these are the things that are sort of separated generally by commas, okay? That's a single piece of data within that record. So, for instance, in the employee table, when we pull in the employee ID and we pull in the employee first name, employee last name, the employee ID is a field in that employee record. The employee first name is a field in that employee record. The employee last name is a field in that employee record, okay? So record is a set of data that describes the item, and a field is a single piece of data within that record. So a database is comprised of records. A record is comprised of fields, okay? So write record to sequential access file by writing, write records to sequential access files by writing the fields one after the other, right? And we can read records from sequential access files by reading each field until the record is complete. Okay, so to write it, we just write the stuff in. We write one record after a time. Record until it's all done, and then we're done. In order to do analysis, we're going to read a record in, then we're going to do analysis on that record, and then we're going to move to the next and the next and the next and the next. So let's say we're doing analysis on that same employee table, and there's an employee birth or an employee start date, right? And there's some sort of a policy that's coming down from upper management that says we're changing this thing, and employees that were hired before this particular date are grandfathered in. Okay, so maybe it's a change of a benefit, and people who've worked there 10 years or more get to keep the benefit, but people who are new hires don't get to keep that benefit. Okay, so I can actually go in, I can read a record in, I can look for the start date, I can compare that start date to today's date, and if that is greater than 10 years, then I can say, hey, this person is in this set, or this person is not in this set, right? Because I could also grab a record, I could look at the start date compared to today's date, and if that's less than 10 years, then I can say, hey, this person doesn't get the benefit, or whatever that might be. Okay, so we can read the record in, we can parse the fields. Parse means analyze through each of those records, and then we can determine whether or not that fits inside of our logic. Now, that was just one, potential case that you might see in doing record analysis. Okay, and the way that it works is in sequential. You start at the first record, and then you end at the last record. Same thing with writing. You write the first record, you write, or you append, right? You start at the first record that you're adding, and then you add that at the end of the data set, and then you close it down. Okay, with reading, you start with the whole data set, and you read from the beginning to the end. Okay, so that's sort of what that is. Now, a record, again, is a set of data that describes one item, and a field is a single piece of data within that. So when you're working with records, it's important to be able to do some of the database kind of concepts. And since this is a beginner class, we're not going to cover that a ton. The database general functions is you're going to want to add records. You're going to want to retrieve records. You're going to want to update records. You're going to want to delete records. It's called CRUD, essentially. You want to be able to make new things, you want to get things out of it, you want to update things, and you want to delete things. So we have add records, display records, search for specific records, modify records, and delete records. It's basically database operations where you want to be able to create, retrieve, update, and delete. Okay, and that's what we will kind of be messing around with as we're messing with some of these CSV and database files. Okay, so that's essentially what you're going to be doing with those records. All right, so we're going to go ahead and take a little bit of a break. Actually, no, we're not going to take a break. We're going to jump over here into PyCharm, and we're going to mess around with records for a second here. Okay, so I'm sure a lot of you are curious. Okay, what would this look like? What would records actually look like? So let's go ahead and change this io.txt into something full of records, okay? So to start with, we're going to go ahead and turn this into write mode. So obviously, all of us are taking a deep breath. Oh no, okay? So what we want to do to start with is we want to just go ahead and emulate, say, a new employee entering some information, okay? So let's go ahead and get first name. And we're going to use the input function. We're going to say enter first name. Okay, let's get the last name. Okay, we're going to say enter last name. And let's go ahead and get age. Might as well just do an age. Input, all right, enter age. Now, I'm going to go ahead and have this be parsed out as an integer. That way we actually have an integer in there. So let's go ahead and print this all out. First name, last name, and age. And make sure all of this is working. Okay, we've opened it up. We opened it in write. We're not really doing anything with it. We're just going to make sure that this input functionality works. Okay, so here's Adam. Here's Spanier. And let's just 195. All right, there we go. Okay, Adam Spanier, 195. So we actually have first, last name, and age. All right, so that's all set up, and that's all well and good. So now let's imagine converting this into a record. Now, records are of the form, let me go ahead and show you. It would be first name, comma, last name, underscore, comma, age. Okay, see how they're comma separated? So the CSV, I've been talking about a CSV, means comma separated value. So an Excel spreadsheet is nothing more than a CSV, which is a comma separated value file. okay? So we're going to create a CSV file. We're going to save it as a .txt, but I mean, we could save it as a CSV as well if we want to. But we're going to use it as a TXT just for now. Okay, so in order to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a couple of steps just so you can visualize this. So I'm going to create a string called record. And I'm going to set that equal to first name plus, I'm going to add a comma in between, plus last name, and then I'm going to add a comma in between, and then I'm going to add age. Now, remember, age is an integer, and so it's going to get mad because I can't concatenate an integer with a string, so I have to use the str function, and I have to go ahead and add those together. Okay, so now when I print record, it should go ahead and print that out in the correct format. So let's go ahead and run this again. Adam Spanier. Oops, we don't do that. All right, so now I have the first name, last name, and the age. Okay, so let's go ahead and write that now into that file. So f.write record. Now, what are we missing at the end of this? I'm going to give you a second. Right, that's a new line. Okay, so with this record, let's go ahead and add in, we got to add a plus, a new line. Okay, so now what we can do is we can actually write this in here, and we can write our first record, and we're going to use the write function, so it's going to overwrite everything. So let's run this, make sure that it actually works. So here's Adam. Oops, here's Spanier. All right, so let's go over to iro.txt, and there we go. We have our first record written in there. Okay, now let's change this to append, and let's play around with this. First name, John Smith. All right, we can run that again. Mary Smith. All right, so here we go. In io.txt, you see we're just adding records. Now, if we were really, really creative, we could just do like a little for loop, right? So we could do for x in range. Let's say we want to add, let's just add three names. I don't want to exhaust you. So we're going to tab that in. So now we're going to loop 3 times through this. So we're going to run this. So we're going to do Frank. They're all Smiths. Let's just make them all Smiths. Jane. Let's add Doe. 213. She's nice and old. Let's add Bill Doe. Sure. And 123. There we go. So I've added 3 names. So let's go over to iro.txt. And there we go. We have this nice beginning of records. So I have first name, last name, age, first name, last name, age, first name, last name, age, so on and so forth. So now I have this little database, right? So let's practice messing around with this database. So let's go ahead and start from scratch. So what we want to do is we want to just read this database in. Okay, so it's f equals open. So we want to open this up, right? Okay, the name is io.txt. Now that we're reading it out, we want to make sure it's in read mode, correct? Now we can use the for loop, and we can just grab the line, right? And now what I can do is I can go ahead and print that line. Let's go ahead and strip off that new line, and let's see what we get. Boom, there we go. Now what's cool is we can actually do something called a split, where we can split it at a comma, and we can actually get the data out of that, but that's a little bit further down the road for now. But what I do want you to look at is now I have these records. Okay, so this is a record, this is a record, this is a record, and this is a field, this is a field, and this is a field. Now if I go in here and I just manually add, I can say first, last, age. Okay, so now when I run it, I'll actually have a label at the top of that. First, last, age. So here's first, here's last, here's age, and lo and behold, our data set is beginning. Okay, so I've taken user input, I've saved it into this file, I've read this file back out, and I can see what's going on. All right, so there you go. There's your records, there's your input, your output, your reading, your writing, your read line, your read, your write functionality. So next video, we're going to be jumping into exceptions, and that should round this section off for you. We'll see you on the next video.